We Own the Night. Chapter 3. The Fairies.
The next night, Candra found herself back on the deck of the Jolly Roger, and a day later too. The sailors were shying away from her, whispering, casting hostile and frightened glances. She did not resemble a sea goddess, but her mysterious appearances caused them to be almost horrified, and some began to think that she was an omen of something greater than their minds could comprehend, and so fear was born. It was only the captain who remained calm and hospitable, inquiring after her well-being and accompanying her to his quarters, where he would interrogate her under the guise of discreet conversation over a cup of tea or glass of wine. It turned out that with the first ray of sunlight the girl invariably disappeared into the air before his eyes, like a night vision, and even physical contact did not hold her here. Accustomed to unexplainable wonders, though still baffled, Hook simply accepted what was happening and tried to reassure her, but the lady shook her head, massaging her temples and forehead, and repeated that she was delirious. She told Ellie about her dreams, the only one she trusted in her surrounding. She was of the opinion that her mistress had been overly disturbed by her acquaintance with Alexander, and therefore her subconscious had created a reality very far removed from this one. Why with Neverland and Captain Hook? The tale of Peter Pan has always been your favorite, my lady. Perhaps you associate it with your parents, and therefore safety, comfort, and love. Chandrelle couldn't agree with that assumption, at least because there was not a hint of safety and love in Neverland, and showed the maid the cut ribbon. They searched the entire bedroom, Ellie even rummaged through the laundry room, to no avail. It must have just come off and got lost, my lady. Will you have the ribbon replaced or a new dress soon? She asked then, but Miss Brightman gave a firm refusal, despite distrusting herself. The piece of ribbon flaunted on the support for the harpsichord lid. However, there was some truth in the maid's words. Alexander, after a long, busy period, he was given the opportunity to breathe more freely, and he took advantage of it to get to know his fiancée better. Mr. Donovan was kind enough to shelter him in his home and would leave it more often, either to see his plantations or to attend social events, so that the young people could spend more time together. He also liked to twist his niece's words to his advantage and to make decisions for her without her prior consent. She had been angry at first, but as no quarrels with her uncle had yielded any results, she soon reconciled herself. After all, he had long since made the main decision for her, to make Commodore Mallow his son-in-law, and the rest was trifles. Time passed unnoticed, for each day passed in the same way. Under the sun, Candra spoke to Alexander, under the moon to James. And very quickly she admitted that compared to the rocking of the sea, the salt breeze, the rustling of the jungle, the clanking of metal, the tails of mermaids, and the ringing of fairy winds, she was disgusted by balls, luscious perfumes and colognes, the smell of decorative flowers in the garden. Though that was not the point, of course. The Commodore questioned her life and thoughts, shared his own, dryly, briefly, with a blank, indifferent look. He was honest, polite, even frank in some ways, but the girl was well aware that he was simply brought up that way and did what the situation, the norms of society, and respect for her as a person demanded of him. Yes, he wanted to know what he could talk to her about, what gifts would be nice for her, what was permissible for her. But he was as cold as a distant star. Perhaps because the lady had initially cooled him down with her confident refusal, he made no attempt to interest her in any way. And those lack of initiative, guidance only by what was right and accepted, made him pale in her eyes to the point of merging with the crowd. Miss Brightman hated the thought of marriage to him so much that she went to bed almost with the sunset, only to be moved to the Jolly Roger as soon as possible. James was very different. Polite and sincere, he didn't show interest and concern for her just because he'd been taught to do so. His eyes lit up. They lit up brighter every time they met on deck as darkness fell, and filled with a sadness bordering on pain when the horizon turned pink. even though he smiled warmly goodbye. He'd ask her questions because he was concerned about her feelings in the course of her life in the real world, tell her every story from his biography that he could remember, inform her if Pan made another attempt to seek a crocodile on him, and then the two of them would lean over a map and try to find the perfect spot for an ambush. Chandrelle, of course, first suggested negotiation as a born diplomat, but Hook quickly dissuaded her of the effectiveness of this method, for the enmity was already too deeply rooted, and Peter would never give up the opportunity to have fun by bullying the adults he so despised. All the more reason to punish him for his cruel antics was a matter of principle for the captain, and he did not want to endanger the lady by revealing her existence to the enemy. On particularly clear nights, they took walks around the island. James would show his guests the most picturesque scenery and at the same time learn to admire it anew, for years he had associated this jungle with the hunt for Pan alone, with the prison in which he was doomed to spend eternity until he was killed. And now he would remember Candra in it, her enthusiastic eyes and the dazzling smiles directed at him, as she remembered his thoughtful, penetrating gaze during their conversations, his inspired, blissful face when playing the harpsichord, his warming palm sometimes holding her shoulder or waist. Over time, the girl realized that she wished for more touches. And with every time, when after a tour of the island they were lying on the shore and contemplating the stars, they were getting closer and closer together. First they held hands, then they touched shoulders, and later the lady began to settle at her captain's side, so that he could hold her and partially wrap her in his coat. They understood what was going on between them, but were afraid to admit it openly, for their relationship was only half true. Candra could only stay in Neverland from dusk till dawn, and Hook could not get out of there altogether. Never mind the reputations of the Brightman and Donovan families and her impending marriage. He was not physically part of her world, and that fact alone sealed their fate. From the cabin, across the deck, up the mast and into the sky came the merry pirate song. James pounded the keys with his fingertips and Hook, spoiling his secret lover with compositions of his own, while she herself contentedly sat on his lap, helped him play the tune with a fresh sound, and sang along. This joint activity strengthened the captain's memory and methodically drew from the bowels of his mind the memories of his glorious past, which the young lady loved so much to hear about. Candra rolled her eyes, sighed dramatically, hit the keys inappropriately, and leaned back on his shoulder.
"Oh, James, how many times? Why do all your songs, even the cheerful ones, have a tragic ending?"
She laughed, giving him a mockingly reproachful look. Hook moved his hands from the manual to her waist and smiled slyly.
I write music with my soul, and all my thoughts, including happy ones, inevitably lead to a sad outcome. My attempt in the Royal Navy after college, my anger and lust for revenge after the fateful battle with Pan, which has left me here today. Even my acquaintancy with you won't end the way we want it to.
The girl, realizing this, blinked absently and fell silent. Realizing that he'd taken a wrong turn, James tried to return the atmosphere to lightness and added with a good-natured reproach.
Besides, the song's not over yet.
"What's there to listen to? Rest in peace in Davy Jones's locker while we walk this mortal earth some more and live like there may be no tomorrow, yo-ho, and a bottle of rum,"
cut off the lady, amusingly imitating the voice of a drunken pirate. Her face wrinkled comically as she did so, and the man couldn't help a few chuckles, raising his eyebrows.
So that's your opinion of my songs?
"Songs are not the point,"
she said, rising and walking toward the chest of drawers. Hook watched her with a mixture of bewilderment and curiosity as she took out and put on her sheathed sword. He'd given it to her when she'd expressed a desire to learn how to fence, because it was never a bad idea to stand up for yourself, especially when you had enemies in the form of Peter Pan and his lost boys.
"I'm tired of suffering the oppression of your sadness, Captain."
The girl spoke heartily in the meantime.
so I'm challenging it to a duel.
She drew her blade with a clang, turned her back on the chest of drawers, and pointed it directly at the astonished James. Pride glowed in his eyes, and playful little sparks flickered in them.
Oh, really? Alas, the only way to get at my sadness is to tear my body to pieces,
He said, curving his lips into a mischievous grin.
I accept that fight, Miss Brightmoon.
He drew his weapon from its sheath, slowly withdrew the blade pointing at his neck, and rose to his feet.
Excellent. Waiting for you on the main deck. Ready in a minute.
The lady announced, smiling in anticipation, and was the first to move for the exit. She enjoyed their sparring, and James took the training very seriously, knowing that fencing and opposing pen were not a game, and therefore a serious approach was imperative. The young noblewoman was a capable student. Though she seemed to lack speed by nature, she had the wit, determination, and ease of movement that were also important. Since Peter was right-handed, Hook periodically asked the sailors for help in training his student, and over time she outperformed them all. It was better to be somewhat prepared, after all, than confused when faced with a real enemy. Now some crew members had gathered to gawk at the spectacle. They no longer mistook the girl for Calypso or a bad omen, but with a mug of rum they wondered when she would be their co-captain. They stopped in front of each other and took up fighting stances. She knew just when Hook would strike. A split second before, his eyes had flashed agitatedly and even seemed to glow faintly red. And now she soundly fought off the opening attack and then fought back smartly, executing an intricate combination of moves. For so long she had learned to ignore all the grace of her opponent, and there was much to see. Long curls rolled over his shoulders and sometimes mysteriously fell to a focused, lively face. The hem of the coat drew semicircles and fell to the hips, emphasizing the athletic figure. Every step and wave of the hands was the definition of elegance. He fought not only spectacularly, but astonishingly, effectively, with a bloodthirsty passion. In sparring, James used only the sword, which so far was sufficient for victory, and mixed the styles he knew, for the most part trying to copy Pen's manner as far as he could without flying at his height and with his left hand. These blows the lady fought off quite well, but still kept losing to him.
Captain, why do you hide your sadness so deeply?
She asked, breathing raggedly and wielding her blade vigorously.
She and I are already kindred.
The man replied, his air of superiority thinly disguised.
So it took my place?
Miss Brightman asked with growing anger.
I will not allow that.
She squinted and cornered her opponent between the staircase and starboard, crossed their swords at the very base, made an effort so that he could not immediately free from the block, jumped up the steps, and before he could strike back or dodge, whistled her blade towards his neck. There was a clang. The sharpened steel was stopped by the curved iron of the hook.
Hey, that's not fair. Peter and the boys have nothing like that.
Chandra protested, hitting the unique device again lightly for greater effect.
I'm not teaching you to fight them. I'm teaching you to fence. You never know what surprises your opponent will throw at you. Surely I'm not the last Captain Hook in history.
James protested with a smile as he continued to hold the blade. The girl sighed disappointedly, slipped her weapon into its scabbard, and muttered as she made her way down to the deck.
I would have won if you had been an ordinary man.
Yes, and I'm honored to admit defeat, my lady.
She paused, turning to look at him in disbelief. Would he, with all his ego, really surrender? He just walked over to her, still smiling, and added merrily.
This fight means it's time to take our lessons to the next level. You are a clever girl, Candra, and you have successfully banished my sadness, though I miraculously survived.
He reached out with his already free hand to her waist and drew her to him. All the hubris instantly evaporated, and the young lady automatically snuggled up to the captain, rubbing her cheek into the clothes on his chest.
Come on, I'm not ashamed to admit that you beat me.
She wrapped her arms around him and closed her eyes, inhaling the scent of expensive fabric, tobacco smoke, hair soap, and slightly sweaty skin emanating from him, then felt him squeeze her a little tighter. Sometimes they stood like that for long periods of time, just looking at the moon, the waves reflecting its light, the clouds floating past it, and the island where the enemies were hiding. Normally it was dark, and only the lights of the Indian settlement could be seen to the west, but on this night a strange light was pouring out of the jungle. Chandra noticed it and broke the silence.
James, what's that? Are the boys playing tricks?
No. Seems the fairies are having a celebration tonight.
Shall we go and have a look?
The captain looked down at his agitated lover, making a decision.
Oh, please. Fairies never fly around here, and for some reason, they don't come near us when we're out walking.
She folded her palms together and looked up at him in an affectionate way, and Hook had no choice but to agree, albeit with a hint of contempt in his voice.
Pan's company is more to their liking, but fine. Let's try not to frighten them.
The sailors quickly prepared the boat. Mr. Smee, who rejoiced quietly every time he saw the captain happy beside Miss Brightman, drove the two of them ashore and stayed to watch on shore. Holding hands, with eyes burning with curiosity, like children, the captain and his companion went deeper into the jungle. It wasn't difficult to navigate on this night, as it was well lit by the yellowish glow of winged magical creatures. They were gathering in a clearing by a huge branching tree, minding their own business. The girl gazed around with delight and even tried to climb the tree, but James reminded her to keep a low profile. So they enjoyed the view, leaning against the trunk, oblivious to everything else.
It's incredible.
Candra exhaled, watching the tiny figures hovering in the jungle, glowing with golden light and merging into a dance. Hook nodded, content with the scenery and, above all, with showing his chosen one something truly unique and aesthetically pleasing, as he suddenly called out softly to her. The girl turned questioningly, followed his gaze, and shuddered. A fairy had flown up to her and was now watching her with interest. Smiling broadly, the young lady whispered with a gasp.
Hi. Sorry, that was awkward. I'm Candra, and you are?
The stranger landed on the palm of her hand, depositing a bit of dust in it and causing a slight tickle, curtsied and made a sound like a bell tolling. Candra opened her mouth and blinked confusedly, pausing for a moment before finally uttering.
James, what did she say? I didn't hear the words.
Learning to understand fairies isn't easy. You have to spend enough time in Neverland and have a certain ability to hear.
He replied vaguely and took a closer look at the magical creature.
She's pointing at the sky. Star? Astra? Aster? Yes, her name's Aster.
Wow, nice to meet you, Aster. You're very pretty, and your feast is splendid.
The lady gave her sincere assessment, still gasping with admiration. The fairy smiled appreciatively and bowed her head, then turned to the man, gave him a hard look, froze when she saw his right hand, and sprang up abruptly, intending to fly away.
Wait!
The girl called out, then, persuaded that she was heard, continued.
We mean no harm to Peter Pan or anyone else. We just came to see your ball. But if we are unwelcome guests here, we will leave.
Aster hesitated, glancing from Hook's stony face to his anxious, frowning companion. Then suddenly she swooped down quickly, dusting the latter several times, glanced doubtfully toward the pirate, but repeated the action and moved swiftly away, merging with the other orange lights. Miss Brightman looked around dazedly and stared at him.
What had she done?
James twirled the tip of his mustache thoughtfully.
I'm not sure, but I'm guessing. There's a fairy who's always hanging around, Panen.
I can hear the music that they dance to.
Inspired by her discovery, Chandra glowed and soared into the air, literally. She caught her breath and widened her eyes, her heart beating faster as she realized she couldn't feel the ground beneath her feet and was looking down at the man. He smiled, watching the display of primal delight, and leveled himself with her, then bowed gracefully and held out his left hand to her.
that case, would you give me this waltz, my lady?
She smiled back, bowed her head in agreement, put her hand in his, the other on his shoulder. The captain could only rest his right forearm on her waist, but it was enough to make her feel secure. In addition, the fingers of his surviving hand were reverently entwined with hers and stroked the very top of her thin skin. Catching the right chord, he led the dance, and nothing else existed for either of them but the two of them and the music. Thanks to the flight, there was no need to keep a close eye on their steps, so they simply enjoyed the opportunity Asta had given them. Both the weightlessness and the happiness they were experiencing made their bodies feel unusually light and their heads go blank. Chandrelle laughed nonchalantly, spinning around, gazing deeply into bottomless blue eyes, admiring the bright yellow reflections in them, and dissolving into a sense of unconditional affection. Hook's smile grew bigger the longer he contemplated her beauty, enveloped in a golden light that seemed to emanate from her too. He was catching her, listening to her tinkling laughter and dissolving into a sense of unavoidable love. After another spin, he pulled her to him and could not let her go again. He put her palm to his chest, hoping that in this way her light would fill his blackened soul, and even through the thickness of his clothes she could feel his aching heart pounding. The sight of his noble face gave her only one thought.
James, I want to give you my first kiss,
she said frankly. His eyes mirrored many emotions at once: surprise, joy, confusion, doubt, desire, and his throat went dry.
Don't waste it on someone you can't be happy with.
They've lost some height.
But I don't intend to give it to someone who causes me nothing but boredom. I certainly won't be happy with him.
Principles and prejudices are speaking for you.
James,
she said quietly but firmly, squeezing his shoulder harder.
I love you.
His eyebrows drew closer, furrowing their inner tips to form a deep crease between them, his eyes glittering even more, and an interrupted sigh escaped his lips. Helplessly trembling in an attempt to respond verbally, they remained ajar, but words were unnecessary for the lady. Seeing in the forget-me-not blueness all she expected, she took the opportunity and carefully supported his lips with hers. The kiss was indescribable. It seemed to combine everything they had lived with and shared since meeting. The flavors of sea breeze, sparkling wine, Barbados rum, Cuban cigars, rose petal, book page, steel blade, scented candle, flavors of captivity, empathy, forgiveness, acceptance, curiosity, caring, loyalty, loneliness, all mingled together and gave birth to something unique. At length Hook did not force things, lest he frighten the girl with his ardent nature and to provide her with the tenderness and respect without which she wilted. But as he felt a soft palm on his prickly cheek and a light scratching near his ear, he exhaled hotly and cautiously deepened the kiss, wrapping his left arm around her shoulders and drawing her slightly closer. The lady didn't push him away and returned his advances until she felt an acute need for oxygen. Recovering their breath, they looked at each other from beneath the shroud of love, and then Chandra hugged James back and hid her face against his chest, and he buried his nose in her long hair. Their bodies, soaring high for the duration of the kiss, gradually lowered to the ground.
The wedding's the day after tomorrow,
she whispered in a doleful voice.
We'll arrange for the dust now, then we'll go to your house, pack up and get out of there.
Hook said, his voice low with a growl.
And where will we go? Who knows what will happen if I try to return to Neverland after daybreak? It would be difficult to get off the island. No one would risk hiding Samuel Donovan's niece on their ship. And what would we have to live on?
The man gritted his teeth in frustration.
I'd steal a ship if it wasn't so dangerous for you. Damn, I'd risk it all but you.
He clutched her tight in his arms as if to prove his point. Stroking his back, the lady added,
Even your ship, would you part with your crew? I would not accept such a sacrifice from you.
A heavy sigh was heard over her head.
No, Pan will certainly sink or appropriate the Jolly Roger in my absence. Smee doesn't deserve such an end to his career as the first mate.
The horizon turned pastel colors, the stars in the heavens fading one by one. She was weak as always at this time of night, and as she swallowed the lump in her throat, she rubbed her cheek against the edge of his coat and said softly,
We have one more night left, then we shall say goodbye.
Candra, my love.
Drawn arms passed through the air and encircled the trembling body in the captain's attire. His lungs caught in a strangling spasm that almost folded James in half. The first rays of sunlight illuminated the gills in his haggard face and burrowed into his slightly disheveled after training lush curls, giving them a reddish hue. A shriek escaped his lips, more like a furious growl, and the iron hook swung into an unfortunate nearby tree. The pirate pressed his forehead against the trunk and did his best to suppress the urge to sob as his right arm slowly slid down, leaving a crooked mark on the bark with its tool. Malice, jealousy, and disappointment were overpowering him at this moment, so he forbade himself to cry. The last time it had happened, the tears burned his skin like boiling water and had a bloody hue, and the thought that he was cursed had not left him since. Cursed to end every important job by failure, cursed to eternal loneliness, cursed to lust for the death of a foolish teenager, cursed to feel the emotions that made him execute people to a horrible death and kill his own sailors. He had come to terms with his new self and believed in the rightness of its intentions. Yet, when he was alone with himself, he was gnawed with guilt and disgust at the image he had built of himself. James was sensitive, romantic, gallant, caring, playful, and Captain Hook was cruel, reckless, bloodthirsty, sneaky, calculating. What if one day this monster attacked Candra? But she needn't worry. In 2 days he'd have no claim on her, and she might not be able to get back to Neverland. Sweet, kind, gentle, naive, bright Candra would fall victim to a marriage of convenience, and there was no way he could prevent it. There was a thin ringing sound nearby, and the man turned his head. A familiar fairy was standing right on his hook, trying to tell him something. James laughed quietly and hoarsely.
Oh, my dear Asta, don't take my words as an insult on the grounds of height to the beautiful fairy people, but I'm afraid you're too small to resolve my grief.
She scowled and pointed angrily behind her back. It turned out she wasn't the only one determined to contemplate the Hook in Love's Agony picture, though the others seemed to have been circling nearby since he'd asked Miss Brightman to dance. They kept their distance, but did not seem hostile. She drew a shape in the air with the dust, moved her hands upwards as if to lift something, and then as if to send something forward, and the image, obeying her will, soared higher and floated upward until it dissipated.
You mean you and your friends can make the Jolly Roger fly?
James tried to translate the pantomime he saw into English, incredulity in his voice. The fairy nodded, waved invitingly for him and his companions, and was the first to head in the direction of the coast where he docked on the island. Encouraged, the pirate took off and jogged through the jungle without losing sight of the golden lights. He was met by the astonished Smee.
Captain?
He grabbed the first mate by the shoulder, roughly turned him to face the sea, and silently pointed his hook toward the ship, trembling with agitation. Fairies scurried over the brig, leaving behind them shimmering ribbons of dust that fell onto the shiny wooden covering and stuck to it. The old man blinked in confusion.
Is this part of your plan, or...?
Get in the boat now,
James ordered, and jumped into it first, keeping his eyes fixed on the ship as it was slowly rising from the water's surface. Smee fidgeted, both pale with fear and red with eagerness, which caused Asta to burst into laughter. Before the man could react, she showered dust on them along with the boat and sent them gliding through the air, heading straight for the ship as well. The first mate groaned, then suddenly burst into laughter.
Shiver me timbers, we are flying, and old Roger's flying, so there's the secret in Fairies. Now we and Pan are on an equal footing.
Hook held up his hands for silence.
Forget him. That's not what's important now.
Truly astounding words for him. But he really had no thoughts of fighting his enemy. He jumped to the deck with the grace of a leopard and brought the stunned sailors to their senses. The sailors did not ask any questions and got down to business, some in silence, some with a surprised cry, some with a happy cry. On the Jolly Roger, the activities of which the crew had grown weary were set in motion.
But how exactly should we do it?
The captain clarified, turning to the Fairy as huge white canvases with a black depiction of a skull with crossed sabers unfolded over his head. Asta pointed to the largest and brightest star still in the sky and waved her slightly bent arms down from above, stopping her forearms perpendicular to her body.
Towards the star and straight.
James interjected, looking through the spyglass his first mate provided.
But that's absurd.
The Fairy tugged at his curly strand and he turned around indignantly. She shook her finger reproachfully, modified her dress and hairstyle to resemble Chandra, drew a large heart directly in front of herself, tried to copy the naively enthusiastic expression, and then abruptly dispelled the illusion and let out an angry tirade, gesticulating vigorously. Hook laughed briefly.
All right, I get it. Without faith, I can't succeed in seeing Candra. I knew the flight was an integral part of the idea, and that Pan is friends with a fairy for a reason. I didn't think I'd ever get out of here.
He folded up his spyglass, staring thoughtfully ahead. Asta said nothing in reply and sat down at the helm.
Why are you helping me?
James suddenly asked, looking at her again, and smirked with good-natured sarcasm.
Like Candra, am I right?
Fairy nodded honestly, smiling slightly.
Thank you. I vow never to harm your people again, to treat them with proper respect, and to return the favor as soon as I can be of service to them. A gentleman's word, not Captain Hook's.
He promised earnestly, putting his hand over his heart. Seeing his serious look, Asta smiled wider, bowed her head in acceptance of his oath, and turned away. The first mate coughed timidly on the stairs.
Excuse me, Captain, but the crew wants to know exactly where we're going.
Hook took the helm. His face reflected an unconcealed joy and unwavering determination.
Mr. Smee, course for Barbados.